Look, we all know this is a video about time stories. It says right so in the title, but before I talk about time stories at all, I want to go into a little bit of a preamble. And a couple of weeks ago, I've been to Essen Spiel, which, if you don't know, is the biggest board game trading show in the world, and it absolutely blew me away. And I brought so many games back. So unlike last year, where after I went to Essen, I got really scared and really agitated and really kind of just felt outnumbered by the number of games I brought back. This year I decided to do something different, and for the last 2 weeks I've just basically plunged myself into playing as many games as possible. Just games all the time, and I've played a great variety of games. I played games that are absolutely great that are new, and I played games that are absolutely great and have been so for ages. I have played games that have absolutely great rule books and games that kind of need a new one. And actually, I've even played games that probably don't even need a rule book. And I have games that I haven't played yet that I think are going to be great. And I have games that I have not played and I have no idea what to think about them yet. And I have played games that pretend that they are art, and I have played games that, well, ironically, they are about art and truly are art. But in this entire massive, ridiculous 2 weeks, and there's more games I've played actually than this, in these ridiculous 2 weeks, I have not played anything at all like Time Stories. Because you see, what Time Stories does is it makes me feel like I'm going to see an old friend, like one I haven't seen ages ago, and I'm really excited about it. I'm like, oh wow, okay, I'm gonna play Time Stories. I'm gonna sit down and play Time Stories, and it does that after you play it for the first time, because the experience you get from Time Stories is unlike any other that I've ever encountered. If you've never heard of Time Stories, then boy, are you in for a treat. See, in Time Stories, time stands for timey, wimey, wibble wobble, and it is essentially a pretext for how some of the rules work and how some of the mechanics of the game work and how the story is delivered to you. See, in Time Stories, you get one adventure in the main box, and I'll get to that a little bit later, but that adventure is not only meant to be played once. See, you're meant to go and experience it and see what happens and learn the things that happened to you in that adventure, and then you're meant to fail and try again, and armed with the knowledge of your previous experiences, you are more likely to succeed. Now, the key part really in Time Stories is stories. It is a narrative driven game. It is a very immersive game. I just want to tell you more about it, but hang on. So if you are a player of a sort of persuasion that doesn't kind of engage with narrative necessarily in board games, and the sort of player that kind of just wants to figure out the mechanical puzzle and how things add up together and what's better and what's worse, then maybe there's not much here for you and maybe you should move on. But if narrative engagement, if narrative immersion are the phrases that really get your loins on fire, then you want to play Time Stories, you really do. And it's really hard to do a review of Time Stories without spoiling anything, but it is essentially necessary because, see, it's all about the story. And, okay, we're going to have a minor spoiler, and that minor spoiler is that we're going to basically show some of the characters visually from the first adventure, and it's one of the first things you see in the game. And if that really bothers you, you can watch Rado's run through instead. But if you're not bothered about seeing the first thing you basically see in the game, and we're not really going to talk that much about them, then stick right with us, because we have to set up the board first. But through the magic of time travel, you know, the board is basically going to be... Sorry, I'm getting a message from Time HQ. Apparently the whole setting up the board through time joke isn't very funny. They've seen it already. We're just going to move on. See, the easiest way to describe Time Stories is to basically say that it's effectively a point-and-click adventure, the board game. So, you know, like Monkey Island or Full Throttle or Longest Journey, one of my favorite PC games ever made. But actually, I think that's slightly inaccurate. I think if I had to describe Time Stories I would say it's probably Zork with pictures, the board game, because oftentimes you are told what happens in a particular scene. So you see, you lay out these cards which form a visual image, and then you read out the top card, which basically says what's going on in this image, and then each player gets to take one of their characters. So they might be a paranoid brute, and they think, oh, you know, this guy clearly needs beating up, and because he just looks wrong, and this guy looks a little bit like he's the G-Man, and he has got some sort of shady wheelings and dealings going on. So obviously we send the cocaine addict to sort it all out, because he's from the mean streets of Bordeaux, I guess. The game is very French. And once you reach those locations, everyone picks up their cards and reads them to themselves, not out loud. Most importantly, not out loud, but to themselves. See, as a player, you are not really allowed to just pick up the card and read it, because that doesn't create an immersive experience. You can see for yourselves.
You walk up to a bush and you look into the bush, and there's a frog there, and it's a magical princess frog, and she says, if you give me a kiss, I will transform back into a princess and give you a wish.
Can we just roll some dice now, please? No, instead, everybody falls into a little bit of silence as they explore what is on the back of this card. Or they might not. They might immediately see it through a visual kind of medium. There might be a picture that tells you exactly what's going on. And you'll often hear people in Time Stories go, oh my God. And it's great. It's absolutely wonderful. And this is what it looks like. So I walk up to this bush, and there's a frog.
Oh my
there.
God, really?
Did you believe it? The frog is talking to me, and it's saying it's gonna grant me a wish.
What are you gonna ask?
I don't know. I could get one of those Wi-Fi kettles where you can, when you're driving up home,
best
you
idea
press
ever.
the app button and the kettle is on, and you come back home and there's hot water. That would be great, I think. That would be really good. And once everyone's read the cards to themselves, they are allowed to place them down and do exactly one action. The first thing you do is you have to move this time tracker back one space. And you see, for each mission you are given a certain amount of time, and when the time runs out, that's it, that's game over. You have to jack out, you have to go back to Timey-Wimey Central. And that is, again, completely fine. It's so much part of the game, and that's what makes it really, really engaging. You see, there are a lot of games where cards tell you just what happens, and it doesn't feel engaging at all. But I remember reading this interview on Shut Up and Sit Down with Jeff Inglestein, who designed Space Cadets, and whilst I haven't found that to be true about Space Cadets, he said one very clever thing that really stuck with me, and that is that theme doesn't come from text on cards. Theme comes from mechanics creating situations within the game that evoke that theme. And ironically, Time Stories breaks that rule, because you see, what happens on the cards, whilst it might feel random, whilst it might feel that you've just stumbled onto a situation that is not necessarily good for you, you just sent the character that is really good at fighting but really bad at searching to basically lockpick a safe, and they will probably try and do that by bashing their head into it multiple times until their brain turns into jelly. But it's okay. See, the great thing about Time Stories is that you get to go back and do it all again. It never feels like a wasted action, because you never feel like you're meant to beat the game on your first attempt. In fact, you don't want to beat the game on your first attempt, because that would mean that the story is over. You want to go back and experience the story again. You want to go back and learn the stuff you've used and adapt to it. And there's items that actually stay with you throughout multiple adventures. So if you've picked it up in one adventure, you get to use it in another one. And how does that work? You don't get to take it back in time with you. No. But basically those items represent information that you've learned. And that thing you cannot unlearn. That's there with you. But here's the thing. So you spend time by doing an action, and one of the free actions in the game is to simply move to a different location. So if you are not very good at cracking a safe, then you might want to send another person who is better at it, and they can have a go at doing it. And whilst that costs you time, again, on the next run, you'll know exactly what you're going to be doing. And another thing you can do is you can simply pass a test, and that can be anything. Can be any kind of test that the card presents. So it could be fighting, it could be picking safes, it could be disarming bombs, it could be talking to someone, just talking, just really having a normal human conversation. And the best part is that sometimes you get to choose what you're going to do. You see, the designers of Time Stories kind of really figured out what is it about choices that's interesting in a game. Sometimes you get choices in the game and they are painfully obvious, and one of them is a good choice and another one is bad. And recently video games have been really good at doing that. There's the Telltale series of Walking Dead games and Game of Thrones games, and there's one game in particular in the same genre that I am really enjoying right now, Life is Strange. If you haven't, that's about time as well. And if you haven't yet, Life is Strange, oh, you really need to. But anyway, I'm digressing. So here's the thing. Choices in Time Stories are similar to those games because you are often presented with a situation that has no good outcome whatsoever, or if there is a good outcome, you don't know how to get there because it's not obvious from what you've been presented. Let's imagine we're in MASH. Let's imagine, one character is Hawkeye Pearson, there's BJ Honeycutt somewhere as well, because I'm fairly sure, I'm not spoiling anything, because I'm fairly sure Time Stories is never going to do a MASH story. Can you please do a MASH story, because that would just be the best. Anyway, so let's imagine we're in a field hospital in South Korea in a war, and there's bombs exploding, and suddenly we have wounded, and there's a guy that's being brought in. He clearly needs medical attention, so you jump in there, you choose the card that shows the guy that's being carried, and you read the card out loud, and you find out that he's an enemy soldier that has a grenade. And you have two options. You can either try and talk to him, you can try and talk the guy with the grenade down, or you can try and just jump, and hopefully that you won't get caught by the explosion. And none of them seem very good. Both of them seem incredibly potentially dangerous, and you never know what the outcome is going to be. And here's the great thing about Time Stories, right? And so let's say you choose to talk to the guy, and you find out that, he's incredibly distressed and he thinks he's going to be, killed in this prisoner camp or whatever, and he just wants to survive, he just wants to live, he just wants to see his family, and, you gently take the grenade away from him, and suddenly you have a grenade item, and then other things might happen. The soldier might actually join you on whatever adventure it is you're having. And this is the cool thing. You've just chosen something, but you don't know what the other choice would have given you. So, even if you've chosen a good outcome, even if you've chosen something that works, the next time you play the same adventure because you failed it on your first attempt, the next time you encounter that specific moment in the game, even though you think you know what the good choice is, you are really, really tempted to go for the other one. Like I mentioned, there are tests in Time Stories, and normally they fall into one of three categories, one of three skills. And the skills are different based on what the adventure actually is, and the adventure briefing will tell you what those skills are and what they mean. But they're normally depicted by icons on your character sheet, and the number associated to that icon is how good the character is at doing that particular thing. So Felix Bonenfant is particularly good at punching people in the face, which is good. It's a nice skill to have if you need it. And the way that tests work is pretty simple. Basically, each encounter that requires a test will tell you what the test difficulty is, and that will come with a number of shields. Some shields might have the skull face on them, which means that they are potentially hazardous. And then you simply take the number of dice that you have in that skill and you roll them. And if one of the results on the dice comes up as a red skull, and there is also red skull in the test, then you are going to take some damage. And it is entirely possible that your character will get killed. But the great thing that happens in Time Stories is that whilst in other games dying might, mean elimination from the game, what it effectively does in Time Stories is it makes you take the pawn that belongs to that character and put him 7 spaces away on the time track, based on where the time counter currently is. And when the time counter moves past that track, that's the number of time necessary for the time headquarters to rejig you back into that particular adventure. Because effectively what you do as time adventurers, you are given receptacles within that particular time that you are traveling to. And all that time headquarters is doing is rejigging your receptacle. And that's great, because if you get eliminated, there is a sense of loss. There is a sense that we have one less character for this particular scene. But what the player can effectively do is grumble a little bit, go make himself or herself a cup of tea, you know, sit down, watch the adventure unfold, and before you know it, you're back into it again. You can do things, and I really like that. I really like how they developed that mechanic. I think it's very clever and very evocative of the theme as well. On top of everything, Time Stories features a save system within the insert where you can put the cards you haven't explored yet, and the cards you have explored, and the cards and items that belong to the different players. But here's the thing, right? Whilst it's in a way genius and really cool, because it means you can stop the game at any point, just pack it away, put it on your shelf, and take it back out again. There's one problem with it. They haven't quite thought this through. You see, there are specific slots for the tokens that your players possess, and you identify that this is the blue player's tokens, and they go in here. Those grooves are not deep enough to store everything that you have, and this could have been easily fixed by, say, simply making deeper grooves. And the same comes for the token storage slots right here, and you can see that mine is a particular mishmash because, well, honestly, they don't quite fit, so I had to figure out ways where to put everything. But regardless, some of the save system does work, and it is fine. And whilst it's a bit flimsy and it's kind of already falling apart in my box, it's a very minor criticism to what is effectively a really, really cool game. It's one of the best games I have played this year, and it's actually one of the best games I've played ever. Period. There's no other game that makes me want to come back to it so much. But before we go in any further, before we wrap this up, and before we conclude this, because there's so many things I could tell you about Time Stories, but I can't, because it's restricted to the plot, and I can't spoil that for you. I can't take that fun out of you. And if you want to, you can do some of your own research, but be very, very careful, because I've read a specific review on Board Game Geek, and it wasn't a positive review. It was a very disgruntled person who wrote it, and they said one word that spoiled pretty much the entire Starting Asylum story for me. So be careful what you read, and be careful about disgruntled people, because they might not honestly have the best intentions at heart. But now it's that time where we introduce a very special segment into this review.
This segment that annoys people because it's probably not aligning with what they think of this game, because it talks about money, and money is a little bit precious to everyone. But please bear with me and just listen to what I have to say.
Okay, so here's the major point of contention about Time Stories that's happening on the internet right now, and this is one thing that people are talking about. And it's the price. And it's not so much the price. The price is £35, and in all reality, you're likely to get it cheaper if you buy it from an online retailer or even a friendly local gaming store that gives you a discount. Is that it only comes with one adventure, and you know that one adventure, even though you're meant to play it 3 or 4 times, it's about 10 hours of gameplay and then it's done, and you can't play it again. Effectively, that story is over. And yes, you can buy the master case, which again retails at $19.99 in England, and maybe again, you know, that's not worth the entry cost for you, but it really is for me. And I'm going to reiterate something that Richard Ham said in his video, that, you know, I pretty much see this as like buying a Blu-ray player, like a medium to tell a story. And this Blu-ray player, which is actually ironically cheaper than a Blu-ray player, comes with a tape already inside it, and I get to experience that. And full disclosure, I have received this copy for free as a review copy, and I have received the master case as a review copy as well. And having played it, I would definitely, and you don't have to believe me, because you might say, well, he hasn't paid for it, so, you know, what does he know? But I would definitely buy this game if I didn't have it. And I will definitely
by the other adventures that are coming out in December and February. And there's one about dragons. How cool is that? And I don't get that argument. I don't get the problem with finality. I don't get the problem with the game being over, because you know, unlike a book, if you read a book, you complete the story and that's it. It's done. You put it away. This is something you can share. This is something, like, even if you played the story, if you really want to experience it together with your other friends, you can say, look, come on, let's sit down and play, and I know what happens, but I'm not going to spoil it for you. We're just going to experience this together. I think that's a wonderful feeling. And I think it's a great way to engage yourself in that story again. And you might, you know, if you're careful and don't spoil things for yourself, if you've completed the adventure successfully, just don't read for all the cards that you haven't explored. You know, just save them, because for next time, you might find out what happens in that bit that you haven't explored yet. And finally, this might not be true for you, but it is true for me, and I imagine it's true for quite a few of you out there. Do you have a game that you have purchased that sits on your shelf, and you've purchased it not like, you know, 2 weeks ago, that you've never ever played? Is there that game on your shelf that you've paid money for, and you have it there, and it's there, and you haven't played it? I do. I honestly certainly do, because things happen in life. For example, you might buy 2 games at the same time because they both come out at the same time, and you're really excited about both of them, but you get to sit down and play one of them and the other one kind of just sits there. It does happen, doesn't it? And I can't convince you to buy Time Stories if you're really against spending 30 quid for a game that will tell you a great adventure. But I don't find it to be a real criticism. And actually, let's move on to an actual criticism of the game. Okay, so let's talk about the 2-player game. And unlike you might think, you don't just play with 2 characters. No, you have to play with all 4 of them, and you control 2 each. And that's really what kind of breaks the immersion for me. And, you know, okay, so the character part is not really the strongest role-playing aspect of Time Stories. It is meant to be a blend of a role-playing game and a board game. And unlike in role-playing games you do 2 kind of role-playings. You do active role-playing, where you kind of set the scene yourself. You come up with situations yourself. You present scenes and encounters. Whereas in Time Stories, you only do the reactive part, where you are presented with the situation and then you react to it, right? So there's very little character role-playing that you actually do, but you do get to experience it. And the 2-player variant completely takes that away from me. And that's why I don't think that Time Stories is a great 2-player game. And it might be a deal breaker for you, but seriously, you just have to play it with 3 or 4 people. That's the way I think it's meant to be played, and that's the way it works best. We have played Time Stories with 2 players and 4 players, and the difference in experience is just over the top. I still enjoyed the 2-player game, and I'm still glad I played the 2-player game, because we're playing Asylum, the first box mission, with just me and Elaine, and it honestly created situations where we wanted to tear each other's hair out, because we were so angry with each other for some of the decisions we wanted to make and some of the scenarios that we were presented with. But the 4-player game was the one where it truly felt like it was a team effort, and we were working as a team and doing things as a team and making decisions as a team. It made the role of time captain, who every round is basically the guy that gets to have final say on what we're going to do. It made that role a lot more important and a lot more evocative, and people kind of listened to the time captain a lot more and deferred the judgment to the time captain. And that's why I think it's a much better 4-player game. And I'm really happy to say that the Marcy Case, which is the follow-up adventure to Time Stories, is also really good. It's actually better than the original adventure, I think. Now, I didn't feel particularly engaged with any of the themes in any of the adventures. They're not really my kind of genre of stories that I enjoy a lot, but I didn't care. And just the amount of different intersections, interactions, and encounters, and, you know, divergences and different kind of things that happen in the Marcy Case made me enjoy it a lot more than Asylum. And if Space Cowboys keeps the quality of these stories up,
I don't even know what to say. Actually, I know what to say. See, yesterday my life was headed in one direction and today it is headed in another. Yesterday I believed I would never have done what I did today. These forces that remake time and space, that can shape and alter who we imagine ourselves to be, begin long before we are born and continue after we perish. Our lives and our choices, like quantum trajectories, are understood from moment to moment. That each point of intersection, each encounter, suggests a new potential direction. Proposition, I am in love with time stories. And if you couldn't tell, this was a quote from my favorite story, which is ironically also a time story. And never have I felt that that quote was more true about a game than time stories. And I have fallen in love with it, and I really hope I can convince you to have a go at it and, you know, maybe fall in love for yourselves. And if you do, let me know how it goes. Just don't spoil anything. So normally at the end of the video we say you should really subscribe to our channel, but actually I'm going to do something different this time and say you should subscribe to some other channels. There's a wonderful board gaming community that does videos that is out there on YouTube, and you should definitely check them out. There's a guy called ActualLol who's pretty new and he does really funny and really well edited and high quality reviews. There's also Paul from Gaming Rules that is my friend, and he's helped me out a lot, and this channel wouldn't be what it is right now without him. And he's a guy who works a lot at what he does to make it look really nice, well presented, really accurate and really informative. And there's also John Gets Games, who you should definitely check out because his reviews are again very informative, very well thought out, and they have really good sort of positive, the negative, the neutral points that really describe the game very well. There's Tiffany Ralph, who does really good convention videos, and if you haven't seen them yet, you should probably watch her Essen trip because it has me in the video. And there's also the Spooning Meeples. You should check those out because the meeples that spoon, and I hope I'm not forgetting anyone. Of course I forgot someone, MaggieBot, who does vlogs on board games and talks about them in a very passionate and very articulate way, so you should definitely check her out as well. That's it. Thanks.